We're here in Owlthorpe Fields. This is the site of a very acrimonious development proposal by Avant Homes to build a new housing estate on the open land behind me, just adjacent to this woodland. We're also on the banks of the Ocker Dyke, the boundary of the historic parish of Eckington, and this is a classic situation, a classic location for an ancient woodland. And I'm stood in this coppice oak stool, which is probably 500 or 600 years old at least. So I'm stood here with this tree. This is ancient woodland. You have to be able to date your woodland, at least implicitly, to about 1600. This tree does that. And the amazing thing here, the depressing thing if you like, is that neither the advisors of the City Council, their ecology team when this land was sold, nor the ecological consultant for Avant Homes, the developer, noticed that this was an ancient woodland. And being an ancient woodland would have impacts on either the sale of City Council land, because it's all owned by City Council, and it would have implications for the scale and design of the development adjacent. None of this has been taken into account, which is absolutely outrageous. The woodland itself is not going to be sold, it's not going to be developed. This is still a public open space, this is still Sheffield City Council's ownership. But the woodland's future will be seriously compromised by the development adjacent. That is a big problem, and it was not taken into account effectively in the sale process, in the planning and development process, and not really given more than a cursory nod in the public inquiry that followed. That is absolutely outrageous. It's so hard to accept that my professional colleagues could possibly miss this hugely important site. I'm stood next to a fantastic old oak tree. I mean, I can barely reach halfway around it, and they didn't notice. Sheffield City Council has very strong policies for protecting ancient woodlands. We're in the Great Northern Forest. We're planting lots and lots of new trees to hold back floodwater, to support biodiversity, to provide recreation, amenity and well-being, and to capture carbon. And yet we're in the process of removing lots of woodland from the site adjacent and compromising the history and the potential longevity of this woodland here. Absolutely outrageous. And if you walk through this woodland, the other thing that you will see if you walk through, even this time of year, but especially in spring, is that it's full of ancient woodland indicator species. Plants that tell us about history, plants that tell a professional ecologist that I'm in an ancient woodland. And then this tree confirms that, because in Sheffield particularly, the oak trees grew very slowly. Since the 1700s, high levels of air pollution mean that our trees are probably 2/3 or less of the size that you would normally expect. So this tree is easily 250 years old. It is probably much older than that. This is all evidence that we are in a wonderful, irreplaceable ancient woodland. So we're actually here at Owlthorpe Fields, and I did have someone email me and say, oh, that's wonderful, that's the place of the owls. Well, actually no, it's not. It's the place of the alders. Owler or ola was the word for alder, and here we have a fantastic alder tree. It is a colossal one. This is one of the biggest alder trees in the whole of the Sheffield region. It's a beauty. And there are several others along here, and hence the name Owlthorpe. Again, evidence for this amazing continuity in the landscape, this irreplaceable history that we're walking through. Another absolutely amazingly huge alder tree. So, you know, we can see where the place name Owlthorpe comes from. It's fantastic. But this also encapsulates some of the problems. These alder trees are here because it's a wet landscape. But how wet is it? We're in the top of this little stream, what we call the headwaters of the catchment. And even today, without the new housing, which is going to steal what water remains from this upper catchment and move it downstream very quickly, so dry it out, there is no water. I'm stood in the stream, I'm not getting wet. There's a waterfall here, it is bone dry. The site is already desiccating. The housing will simply tip the balance and the wood over time will dry up. Now that means some of the ancient trees that we've already seen, which have grown up over centuries in a particular set of conditions, will start to struggle. They won't die tomorrow, they won't die next week, they won't die in a couple of years. They will die gradually over time. They will run out of water, the tops of the trees will start to die back, and you'll see the classic stag-headed trees emerge. And then vulnerable to disease, that will probably finish them off within the next 30 to 40 years. So this ancient woodland, which has been here since before the 1500s, part of the landscape that goes back even further, will gradually be throttled by the new development. That is totally unacceptable, and it has not been taken into account in any of the proposals or in the public inquiry or even in the sale of the land. When this woodland in public ownership was sold to the land adjacent was sold to the developer, that development would have an impact on this woodland. That was not taken into account when those decisions were made. And there's an issue with that you have a local authority who own land and stand to gain from the sale of that land. Gamekeeper turned poacher. That is not acceptable. So, Owlthorpe Fields housing development, thank you Avant Homes. It's behind me, we're just on the perimeter fence, which already the locals have certainly shown their objection to, but they're being fenced out of their open space. This land has been left for over 40 years since the farming finished, and what we've got behind is an amazing, spontaneous, natural young woodland, 40-year-old woodland and scrub, and it's some of the most fantastic, rich habitat that you will come across. This is what I describe as a biodiversity hub. It's a powerhouse for this whole area, and yet the developer and their consultants describe it as being of very little ecological or biodiversity interest. It's permeated by ancient hedgerows running down across the site. These have badger habitat, these have a whole host of insects and things like butterflies and wildflowers. It's, you know, these are really ancient bits of habitat. They're very species rich. They are irreplaceable. A little bit like the woodland adjacent. The woodland is not being developed, but this development here is going right up. There's no effective buffer. The buffer between the woodland and the development actually takes into account, it moves into the area owned by Sheffield City Council within the woodland. The government agency DEFRA specify 15 metres minimum as a buffer between a development and ancient woodland, and this actually is way, way below that. It also involves tipping soil over the roots of ancient trees growing on the edge of the woodland. It says, again, the guidance says no, you shouldn't do that. Natural England say no, you shouldn't do that, but it's happening. The buffer is pathetic. It's not even the minimum that is required. An issue here is also the public usage of this land. It's been taken out of farming for 40 years and local people have begun to use this, and they use it very actively. Young children, older people, parents with children walk through, they recreate here, they touch nature here. It's hugely important. It's my belief that having been public access unchallenged for 40 years, it should have been made public open space, and there's a legal precedent for that. It's not happened. It's not happened perhaps because it's the City Council who are selling their own land and gaining financially from it. Maybe if it wasn't that, maybe they would have designated this as a public open space. You can make up your own mind. But this is a fantastic habitat. And the other thing, whilst we stood here with the fences, the bulldozers about to arrive any minute, we hear the words, no net biodiversity loss. I do not understand how this site fulfills any of that. And we are told that we can offset, and we can even calculate the relative values of different habitats, and we can offset any damage. And that offset is going to be on existing wonderful open space adjacent. It's already here. You don't need to do anything to it, so you can't offset anything to it. And the other thing is, if you read the DEFRA, the government agency guidance, if you read it carefully, and the guidance from the Professional Institute, the CIEEM, then actually if you have ancient or irreplaceable habitat like the ancient hedgerows or the woodland, the ancient woodland which is being compromised here, you cannot use that calculation. It says avoid damage, you cannot mitigate it. So why are we perpetually told that it doesn't matter, and the inspector said this at the inquiry, it doesn't matter because it will be offset, and what will be produced will be richer for biodiversity than what we have already here. This is greenwash gone absolutely stark raving bonkers. What has come out from the Owlthorpe Fields campaign is a huge grassroots support from local people, and you can see along the fence line which separates us from where the development will be, people have put their expressions of concern, their distress, with messages along the fence line. It's very hard not to stand here and feel quite emotional about this, because people are bringing together their emotions, their feelings, their upset, because this has been taken away from them. And local people have very little influence in this process, because if you go to planning, if you go to a public inquiry, you have local community people, often in their own time, often hugely stressed because their environment is being compromised. Their lives are being inexorably altered for the worse. And they are then up against batteries of highly paid barristers and consultants whose sole jobs really are to get the consent through and to win their case. Even if in doing that they have to undermine the case and sometimes try to humiliate the individuals who are presenting as champions for their own green environment. And the argument is presented as though if you are objecting to housing on your doorstep, you're a NIMBY, not in my backyard, and there is no argument because we obviously need homes, and by objecting you're denying people homes. That argument is completely fallacious, because it's not a matter of not wanting homes, it's a matter of the right house in the right place. And there is lots of land available for homes on brownfield and increasingly on inner city or inner town situations. So it's not housing or no housing, it's actually getting it in the right place, providing high quality homes in the urban environment with minimal transport costs and access to services, etc. So it's not this nebulous argument as it's presented of you are object to the development, you are taking away the opportunity for homes. It's not that at all. But I do believe that that argument is why there is no coherent political opposition being voiced by opposition parties. And that is really a serious issue that must be addressed.